think in society we have this idea that healing is, beautiful and magical. Nope. It's raw. It's the ugly cry. But you also find out pretty quick that it is rewarding. What was it like for you?
This is Hard Knox Talks.
All right. Our very, very first in-studio podcast. I've never done one of these. I was going to call it unplugged, but it's very much plugged in. So without further ado, I have Allan Kehler here in the studio with me. What's up, Allan?
Daniel, so grateful to be your first guest.
So you came to my door this morning with some books. We've got, let's see, I got 5 books.
Mental Health, It's Time to Talk by Allan Kehler.
To give away.
Link in the description.
And I'm not giving them away on this show.
The link in the description is to buy the book.
But I will be giving them away on the Facebook page and on the YouTube channel. So if you're hearing this, follow us and subscribe and turn on notifications and do all the things that people like to pound into you 24 hours a day. Allan, tell us about... So you're a person in recovery.
Yes.
That is correct. I am also a person in recovery. And I noticed that there was problems in my life before I stopped using substances, but I came very much more aware of those problems after I entered into recovery. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you? You are a successful keynote speaker now. Surely there's been a lot of trials and a lot of bumps along the way up the mountain. So tell us about your first year in recovery.
The first year in recovery was wild. I mean, I think my definition of addiction is it's a way to live outside of self so that we do not have to be with self. And in hindsight, look, I had no relationship with myself. Do not make me feel. Do not make me go within. And if any counselor, family member, someone close to me tried to make me go within or look at some of that pain, I, like many others, reverted to anger. That was always my greatest defense mechanism. And it took me a long time to understand that anger is really a secondary emotion. And when I think about that first year of recovery, anger was at the surface, but what lay beneath it was pain. It was sadness. And the problem was this, Daniel. As a young man, I had no idea how to be with that pain. It wasn't modeled that it was okay to shed a tear, to be vulnerable, to reach out for help. And so I think very much for me, that first year was about giving myself permission to feel, to actually embrace the fact that feeling leads to healing.
You know, I listening to you, that reminds me of my own path in early recovery, and oftentimes I joke, and there might be a thread of truth in this humor, but it's like I think that resentment may have kept me sober in the first however long, and I held on to that resentment. It was like, I'm gonna stay sober, and you'll never get sober, but I'm gonna do this first. I'm gonna do that first, and it was that old thinking, that old like revenge type resentment that just eats away at our souls. Early on, I think that's what fueled me, you know, and I don't recommend it. Like I wouldn't say like you go and have some real bad stuff happen so you can, get sober. But, and it took me a number of years actually to fully, at first I thought I was just trying to let go of the resentment. I thought I was like trying to be free from the resentment, but it took a number of years for me to realize what you had just said, that underneath that resentment was pain. It was easier for me to hate than it was to love. So how did you come face to face with the pain?
Ew. The only word, I guess, is it's a process, isn't it? As you and all the listeners who've gone down that path know, it's not a single event. It happens over time. I think that maybe another, seeing as we're kind of going down the road of metaphors, I would say I was just frozen for so long, and to heal is to thaw. And slowly over time, I kind of peeled back those layers. But the catalyst for me, I mean, honestly, this is twisted up because I was also a compulsive gambler, right? I lost everything while being an alcoholic, but I never put the pieces together that I was actually an alcoholic. So I was actually already doing presentations at jails, treatment centers, schools, talking about sobriety, recovery, while I was an addict. People don't really know that. And then all of a sudden, I got a call from my best friend, Justin Andres, and he says that he's going to check himself into treatment. And I said, "Why? What are you talking about, man? Why the hell would you even do that?"
You can't drink in treatment.
You can try. And Justin says, "Do you realize that all we've ever done together is drink?" And it was the weirdest aha where I realized, man, I have drank every single day except for maybe one in the last 3 months. And just like that, I actually quit. I quit. And the twisted thing is 3 months later, I moved from Edmonton to Saskatoon in with a woman who's now my wife, Tanya, and her 2 kids. And that was the game changer for me, where she very much gave me almost, a tough love approach. You choose to go back down this path, everything that we have now is gone. And Daniel, here's the crazy thing. How I learned how to get sober was, guess where I got hired right away when I moved to Saskatoon?
Calder,
an inpatient treatment center.
Lucky guess.
See, but on a piece of paper, the manager saw a guy who's already been talking about recovery for years. I'd already done almost 100 different presentations. And so I really learned how to get sober by being a counselor. And I also learned how to get sober by instructing a youth care worker program on people who are taking addictions counseling class. Like, how twisted is that?
I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah. I mean, Rand Teed, friend of the show.
He's coming on Tuesday.
Oh, hello, Rand, in advance. I mean, I remember when I told him that story on his show with Rod Peterson, and he said, well, basically it's a case of the blind leading the blind, which was true.
Yes. Yeah. Now, would you call yourself a keynote speaker at that point in your life? Or were you just doing educations?
Yeah.
Okay. So, was there a pinnacle moment where you're like, I want to get up on big giant stages and talk to thousands of people? Like, was that like a aha moment, or did that something that evolved over time?
What happened for me is when I was living in Edmonton, I started to go to these 12-step programs, and there were never young men who were there. And I remember, what's that? You were there?
Well, not at those ones, but all other ones.
And I remember thinking to myself, there has to be other people struggling with this. Gambling in particular, because there's a lot of shame around that. So I Googled problem gambling Edmonton, and I marched into the Problem Gambling Resource Network. And I remember walking up the stairs, and I said, can I speak with the executive director? He was there. His name was Ray Reschke. I shook his hand. I said, Ray, let me be a face and voice to this. That's how it started. The man gave me $75 to go to schools, treatment centers. That included gas too.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, I was on top of the world. And I think that what fueled it is a combination of I just knew that there had to be others. And as soon as I started to share my story, I felt better. Of course I did. And then I started to hear those two.
Who doesn't like to talk about themselves?
That's very true.
Yeah.
I started to hear those two powerful words from people where they'd come up after and they'd say, me too. And I was like, what? I'm not alone?
Get out of town.
Right? And that became, infectious, really.
Do you think it was a form of escapism at first? Like when you mentioned like you were doing counseling, you were doing these things. Do you think that being in those environments and hearing other people's challenges like gave you an opportunity to be like, oh, at least I wasn't like that bad?
Yes. And it was another way to live outside of myself, and it was a way to build up myself. If one can turn pain into purpose, that is a beautiful thing. But I also found myself becoming addicted to that, losing myself in how can I get more of it? How can I get more of it? And, even with what I alluded to before with the definition of addiction, I can look back in that first year of recovery. I switched up things so quick. Like all of a sudden, I'm taking pills left, right, and center. All the pills are gone. And then it was garage sailing. Daniel, who needs to buy 62 teacups and saucers? Who needs to buy 100 pairs of earrings and flip them?
What was your motivation? Oh, you're going to flip them.
That's what I did.
Did you do it?
I did. I made good money.
Really?
But it again was just a way where I don't have to look at myself. And then it was coin collecting, learning everything I could about coins. And it just kept going. And then eventually you realize, okay, over time you have an awareness where you just got to do the work.
What did the work look like for you?
It's nasty. It's ugly. I think in society we have this idea that healing is, beautiful and magical. Nope. It's raw. It's the ugly cry.
Yeah.
But you also find out pretty quick that it is rewarding.
Yeah.
What was it like for you?
Oh, it was the same. I mean, when I first entered into recovery, I came out of treatment on the pink cloud, so to speak. And I rode that thing like a Harley for a while. Like life was wonderful, and I would go into meetings and I would be like, I'm going to change some lives tonight with the stuff I got to talk about. And then, but that, not unlike yourself, going and sharing my journey, as raw as it was, and believe me, early on, it was very raw. Sometimes I look back and I cringe a little bit, like, man, I can't believe I put that on that room, But it got really, really tough when that pink cloud, like when just not using wasn't the answer. When the problem started to come in, when it got quiet at night or when it got quiet during the day, if I didn't have all that time to be busy, my thoughts would get really dark really fast. And for me, what worked was, I dove into the 12 steps and I worked them as best I could at the time. And I stayed really close to the recovery community. If they did nothing else for me, they gave me a place that was reasonably safe to learn how to be a human being in society. I didn't know how to do that. I'd been using, my first drunk was 13 years old. And from that point on, my whole life became about the next time. I had to make sure that there was going to be a next time where I could escape or whatever it was I was running from. So having that space, being close to that community, and I made mistakes and other people made mistakes. And that taught me how to live as a human in the world where people make mistakes and you don't have to get drunk over it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing for me, Daniel, is I found that, I don't necessarily go to a 12-step program to work the program as much as I go to be understood. There is something to be said, and you said this before too, where so often we can live in our head. I remember an elder said to me, it's okay to let the bird in your mind, but do not let it make a nest. And I found that as soon as I was able to surround myself with others who had similar lived experiences, the nest started to slowly vanish, because it is amazing when, like I'm starting to hear my story through your story. You have similar thoughts. You have similar challenges. And that, I think, for me, more than anything, is why it is imperative for me to get into those spaces. Otherwise, it's the stinking thinking, it's reverting to the old behaviors, the thoughts creep in, going back to isolation, withdrawing. But thankfully, in recovery, we start to have people around us who can pick up on these cues before we even do. Has that happened for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And my mom's usually the first one. She's not afraid to share with me how she the things that she sees in me. Usually she's right. Sometimes she's not. And that's another thing. There's something that we can talk about right there. I have learned that other people aren't always right.
Get out of town.
Yes, that's true. And other people, and just because other people don't understand the way you think doesn't mean the way you're thinking is wrong. Tell us about some experiences that you've had in that, where people were like, Al, you're wrong. And you didn't believe it. And it turns out you weren't wrong. And it was a beautiful thing.
Here's where I think I want to go with that question, because how often haven't we heard someone who, whether we're talking about recovery or life in general, and they just kind of interject and they say, oh, I get it. I understand. And at the end of the day, no, you don't. You can't. Even recovery, there are certain things that we can all get. There's some similar spoken language and experiences. But I think that one of the greatest gifts we can ever give people is just listen. Like and for everyone who's listening, like, how many times hasn't somebody said to you, I get it, or or when you've opened up a door to have a conversation, they then respond with, you cannot possibly understand what I've gone through. And at that point, we often be like, oh, yes, we can, and blah, blah, blah. If we respond with these 4 words, help me to understand, that's the game changer. That right there, because at the end of the day, everyone just wants 3 things. I think everyone wants to be seen. I think everyone wants to be heard, and everyone wants to be supported.
I didn't hear understood in those 3 things.
Well, let's just classify that under support.
Oh, okay.
I think that if one is seen, heard, and supported, they will essentially be understood.
Okay. How many books have you written?
4. But you know what's interesting?
What?
The very first book that I wrote, this is back in 2014, focused on addictions. It's focused on the person who's struggling and the person who has a loved one going through it. So it plays off both angles. When I got that first book in hand, it's called like The Proof. I remember picking it up from the bus depot and I had it in my hand and I saw a green garbage can 5 feet away. And Daniel, I was so close to throwing that in the garbage. And see, this is why. Because so many authors, they're like, oh, when I got that first book in hand, it was like a fine wine. I was so excited. I was so proud. Nope. It was the complete opposite for me. You know what I felt? Shame. An overwhelming sense of shame. And it was very much, who the hell do you think you are that you can put a book out there? And that is the underlying emotion for me. And even to this day, I really struggle with value. I struggle with loving self, and I struggle with loving others.
So where did you went on to write other books? Clearly you got past that emotion. Tell us a little about that.
I have not actually gotten over that emotion. It has not consumed me, but here's another example. So I do these events, and now they're much larger scale. So, 1,000 people, and there are lines after where people want me to sign their books. And I think to myself to this day, what the hell is wrong with you? Why would you spend money on this? And why would you want me to sign it? It's that old thought pattern, right? And even though I'm 12 years into recovery, those things don't go away. And I think that often people see the person who is outgoing, smiling, great family, has the home, not a house, and we assume, and this is in general, where we really never know what people are struggling with or going through. And for me, well, on the surface, like, I'm so grateful for the life I had. I am so grateful. But that's not to say that it doesn't, like if there was one word for me to describe life, it would be hard.
What would you say to someone if they were to come up to you and said, I can take away all that pain?
How much? Here's $1.
No, but I mean, with our pasts, that gives us this valuable asset.
100%.
So in that context, if someone did come to you and say, I can take away all your struggles, I can take away all of your bad memories and all of your thoughts, and you would just always be happy and never have to struggle for anything, what would you say?
Yeah. See, this is the twisted sense of gratitude part. And we've talked about this before. There is no way that I could ever put numeric value to my lived experiences. It's painful, it's raw, it's so hard, but it is precious and something that you and I hold close to our heart. It is our greatest gift that we can now use. But that's not to say that we don't pay a price. And I think everyone in recovery has this, it's not even daily. I mean, we talk about this all the time. It's very, again, a metaphor, step by step, but it's hard. It is hard. But it is a path that we choose. And there, you know what, I know I'm diverting here from the books. Maybe that's on purpose because I don't like to talk about that stuff. But
back to the thing, yeah.
But you know what I love more than anything else is that in today's day and age, On social media, we are seeing more and more people step up and openly talk about their sobriety, and they talk about their anniversaries, whether it's 3 days sober, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years. And you do this all the time through Hard Knox Talks, which is amazing. That did not happen 5 years ago, where people would have been applauded and supported in that way.
It's hard for me to comprehend that sometimes, because I am so boisterous about my journey. I've been screaming it from the rooftops since I had 5 minutes sober. I was on my way to the, if you look back 5 years ago, February 12th, 2017, there's a post there of me like talking about, you know, defeating my demons, and I'm on my way to detox right now. And then, you know, and it's funny, but actually I'm really glad I did that. You know, there are some posts out there that I wrote that it was, I don't know, maybe I probably shouldn't have, but for the most part, you know, chronicling my journey comes down to that thing that you said earlier about people approaching you and saying, me too.
Yeah.
You know, sharing my journey, sharing my struggles in real time. Not trying to be this like I'm recovered and I'm polished and I straighten my crown and walk out the door. It ain't like that, man.
Right.
It ain't like that. You know, I was thinking this morning, I try to put out meaningful content every day, like memes and whatever. And something that came into my head, I think it was yesterday actually, was the bad dreams never go away. We just get better at waking up from them. Can you relate?
Put that on a billboard, Daniel.
I put it on a meme.
It's a good meme.
It's the new billboards, really.
Yeah. Okay. You got to teach me your ways. Yeah, of course. It is one hell of a journey, and the relatability though is everything. And that's, I think, the beautiful thing about what you've created through Hard Knox Talks. Everything starts with an idea. And I think that, like, this came up yesterday when I was doing a presentation. This person asked if I get nervous before I do these keynotes. And I remember when an elder said to me, the day you get up there, if you're not nervous, you better turn around and go home. But I also believe that when we have something inside us that we think might lead to purpose or a career, it's there for a reason. And for me, that was always beneath it. I always said to myself, there has to be some reason for me to be going through all this hell. Like, there has to be a greater purpose for this. And I think looking back, I always knew that someday I would be able to do something positive with this pain. And for anyone listening, or, you know, if there's something that's fueling you, or if there's a passion, I guarantee you can do something with it. Because the game changer for me was coming back from an event, and I was listening to this audio book by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and there's a line where he says, whatever your passion is, I promise you can make a living doing it. And you know what I did? I got back to Saskatoon. I called Calder, and I said, thanks for everything, I'm out. And just like that, I walked. And I walked from the benefits, and I started to put more time and energy into speaking.
That's a beautiful moment, isn't it? Like, did it feel like a weight came off? Like, the moment you said, I'm out, like, did it feel like a weight came off or a weight went on?
When you know, you know.
I agree, man. I hear that. I feel that deeply. So,
And here's the other thing, along those lines. So at that point, now I'm teaching at a college, half part-time, and the other time is spent on speaking and writing. Then 3 years ago, I'm doing an event in Buffalo Narrows, northern Saskatchewan, and I wake up and I'm like, whoa, what's happening to me? I feel like I'm supposed to be done at SIT, where I was teaching. I loved SIT, learned so much. And so I went for this morning walk, and I started to pray to Creator just for some clarity. And I get back to the lodge where I'm staying, and there's an eagle soaring high above. And the eagle always shows up when, you know, I need it the most. And so I was like, okay, I understand. And I started to cry.
Yeah.
That was a moment of when you know, you know. I called Tanya, my wife, right away, and I said, I think it's time to make the jump. And she said, okay. Like, absolute trust. We have 4 kids. There is no guarantees. And so I called the dean at the college, Barb Sankey, and I said, hey, when I get back to the city, let's talk. This was in August. And yeah, we had a talk. I said, I'm out. And that was the greatest liberating moment also very fearful and vulnerable, but I guarantee you can relate to that because you and I both walked from all forms of security to do what it is that we feel we were meant to do.
Yeah. It was just January of this year, January 22nd, where I hadn't even been doing this for a year yet. And I had that moment, and I made that phone call. I was in First Nations University to be an Indigenous social worker in my first semester. Like I wasn't even warmed up yet, you know? And it wasn't that I didn't, like, I loved the environment there. I loved the things that I was learning. My classmates it was a great experience. But I looked at what was coming up around me, you know, in this room that we're sitting in right now. And I looked at my analytics, and I looked at the organizations supporting me, and I don't need a degree to do this, you know? And I made that call, and I said, I'm out. And they said, good for you, man.
Yeah.
And it was the woman that I spoke with. I actually had like quite a long conversation with about transitioning and about recovery and about all of these things. She's like, wow, how are you really? You're just going to do that, hey? And I said, I'm as surprised as you are, but here we go. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to quit schools. I'm sure you're not, or quit their job. Like for me, it was a long time of one foot on the dock, one on the boat. But there is something to be said that when you know, you have that intuition. And for all of us who are in recovery, man, you think about the time and energy, the creativity that we put into our using. If we can refocus and rechannel
Genius.
that.
Like, I'm still proud of some of the ways I got dope, man.
Right?
Yeah.
I think everyone can relate to that. If you rechannel that energy, what can happen? It's unbelievable. Yeah. We are our greatest barriers. And I think what I learned and what I embraced early on, Daniel, is I have to just do some things afraid. Because fear is everywhere. But there are those people who say, it's too hard, or I just can't. And sometimes we can't, but we need the people around us to help us to believe in ourselves.
Yeah. So I know you don't want to, but let's talk about this book. So we've got mental health.
How clever is that?
So clever.
Mental
It's
health.
just a delicious little, is it a pun?
We can call it a pun.
Well, whatever it is, I love it. So when we first started talking about having you in studio here, I said, pick a few excerpts out of your book that are meaningful to you, and we'll have you read them out, and we'll talk about them. So what stood out, before we do that, what stood out to you the most during that experience of collecting the stories of writing the book? Like, what was the most meaningful part of all of that?
There's nothing more powerful than someone's story. There's nothing more sacred than someone's story. And nothing has the potential to shatter stigma surrounding addiction, mental health, like someone's story. So for me, it was hands down just being honored for people to open up and share their story. But here's the thing. I am very much, I don't know what the word is, like a medium, or like things come through me. Because that book, I didn't ever have an intention of writing that book on men and mental health. What actually happened, Daniel, is I was shoveling my driveway. And it honestly felt, I actually turned around because I thought someone hit me over the head with a shovel. And
now that's an idea.
Yeah. I'm not making this up. And all of a sudden the whole book just went right in front of me. The whole outline of the book. And I threw my shovel in the snowbank. I ran inside, I grabbed my laptop, and I started typing. And that night, it was either that night or the next night, I can't remember, I had a vision. I am not a vision kind of guy. But I see this long line of people, and they're all handing me this piece of loose leaf with a story on it. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And then I realized that these are all men. And that's when I understood, okay, this is supposed to be a book specific on men and mental health. And in the next week, I reached out to a few people. Others somehow just reached out to me 10 months later from start to finish. We were doing the book launch.
Wow.
And that is just another example. This has always been bigger than me. And I'm sure you and a lot of listeners can relate to this. There's no logical reason why I should be alive after the life that I've led, other than I feel like I'm just here to carry a message.
Yeah.
And so the book is an extension of that.
Yeah. Finding people to come and share their story or their expertise is like, by and large, the easiest part of this. People just, like you said, people just want to talk about it now. Let's dig into this book. Why don't you read us an excerpt out of your book?
I always find this weird, but here's one that I picked. You know Brad Sorosky.
I do.
Brad Sorosky, former student of mine when I was teaching at SIT, actually getting married tomorrow.
No, he's not.
I kid you not. But anyway, I love, he's just another prime example of someone who's turned pain into purpose. Now, here's what he says. He says, I have seen how people treat diseases differently. When I was going through addiction, people crossed the street to get away from me. I recall desperately needing a ride to detox, but I couldn't find anyone who wanted anything to do with me. When I was going through my cancer treatments, people wanted to get closer to me. They were quick to support me and would say, if you ever need a ride to a doctor's appointment or anything at all, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to take you. Whether I was battling addictions or cancer, I was still the same person suffering. Why was I ostracized with addiction, but loved and supported with cancer? My experience speaks volumes to the stigma that still exists around drug and alcohol addictions. Education and understanding will reveal that we all deserve love and respect.
Why does that stand out to you? Why did you choose that one?
Because information is power. What you're doing with Hard Knox Talks, what this book does is it reveals the realities of people who have struggled, and it shows that more than anything else, we are people. We are people who are often hurt, but at the end of the day, we have the same basic needs. Yet, unfortunately, society still sees addiction as this choice or this moral failing sometimes. And thankfully, thanks to your work and the work of many others, we're starting to see that we all have the basic needs. And again, going back to what an elder said, he says, turn us all inside out. We're all the same. We're all the same.
What was your experience with family and with those that were close to you when you entered recovery? Did you experience a lot of stigma, a lot of mistrust, a lot of standoffish behavior between you and your loved ones early on?
I was pretty fortunate because I was living in a different city and very few people knew the magnitude of my struggles. In fact, when I had been given a month to live from a doctor, there was not one person in my life who knew where I was at. Not one. Because I kept that from everyone. And that kind of speaks to a few things. First of all, in our addiction, you make me choose between you or the addiction. Addiction wins. And I had pushed a lot of people away, but I was really fortunate to have family who always loved me, who always supported me, who were always there for me. And then I was given this new family, Tanya and her two boys, who loved me for me. And as someone who's always struggled with self-love and loving others, that was wow, that was a gift.
There's a lot of people out there who would say that getting into a relationship so early on in your recovery is a mistake. Clearly that was not the case for you. Now you've told me quite a few times that that relationship was a turning point for you. Do you think you could have done it without it?
I mean, I can honestly say that had I not met Tanya, had she not come into my life when she did, I really don't think I'm vertical. I don't think I'm alive. It is that simple. I was not in a good place for a long, long time. And obviously something greater than me kept me around. And that's an interesting rabbit hole too, because I lost Justin, my best friend, to suicide, who had a very, very similar journey as I. We both struggled with mental illness. We both struggled with addictions. And I remember when he passed, I remember approaching someone who I respect, and I said to her, like, why have I always been saved? Why was he not? And her answer was perfect. And she said, you have no right to ask that question because he has his journey and you have yours. And what I'm saying is, people will always have an opinion. People will say, you have to be cautious or maybe don't even get into a relationship with others. I think there's some truth in that. But at the end of the day, it's our journey, right? Like we make our own path.
So what else you got in the book there?
Well, I have one other thing.
I know you've got two things.
So,
Did you have trouble picking excerpts? Like, did you have to like sit and think about like, oh, what am I going to read? Or did you like, no, you had to get these two go-tos that are...
no, this is not what I do. So I had to actually intentionally sit, and I was like, Daniel asked me to find something, and I had no clue what the hell to even talk about. But one that stood out for me was, and this is an excerpt by Chris Beaudry. So it's some background on this book. It features, I think there are 16 men who tell their story.
Mhm.
And one of the chapters is dedicated to addictions and recovery. And one of the men that I interviewed was Chris Beaudry, who is the former assistant coach of the Humboldt Broncos. Chris pulled up to the bus crash 15 minutes after it happened, which claimed the lives of so many people. So what that man experienced is, I mean, I can't even fathom it. But what people don't know is that he actually had a previous history battling addictions, and he almost went back down that path again after that accident. But here's what he says. This is about half a page long, so grab a coffee.
I got one right here.
Okay, buckle up, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I have come to understand that hardening your heart is more dangerous than facing your pain. When you come face to face with your deepest suffering, you are able to find healing. If you tiptoe around the problem, you will never be able to fully get through it. Bringing yourself right in front of the most terrifying things inside you is what helps you to get through them. Pain is unavoidable, but suffering can be eased by meeting our pain with compassion rather than anger. We have to begin the journey of forgiving ourselves and others for the harm we have experienced or caused. In Western culture, men are born and raised to not face pain. A belief exists that looking at your pain makes you weak. Not true. Sure, examining your pain can bring sadness and tears, but it also allows you to heal. And through this process, you actually become stronger. In closing, Chris says this, one of the strongest things a man can do is to say, I have looked at the worst things I have done in my life. I have examined the most painful things that have happened to me. I have forgiven myself, forgiven others, and I have worked through my own pain to be the healthy person I am today. Chris Beaudry, everyone.
That was a pretty complete thought. There's not a lot left there undiscovered, I don't think. That was very well done. I'm quite confident in sharing my pain, in sharing my journey when it comes to being around my community, the community that I'm used to being around, other people in recovery or sober curious or the many layers in between. When I go outside of that, I still feel that insecurity. You know, when I went to a dinner, the Premier's dinner, 2022. You know, 1,000 people in a room, Sask party.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a tone of recovery in that room. That wasn't like, we're all here because we've been through mental health challenges. Well, maybe they are, but but they certainly weren't talking about it. And in fact, Scott Moe did an hour-long speech, and he didn't even give mental health an honorable mention. Do with that information what you will. But I felt like a fish out of water in that room. You know, and that's not to put a negative connotation on the people in that room by any means. This is a conversation, this is a statement I'm saying of my own experiences inside my own head, that people ask me, like, how are you so boisterous about this? How are you so honest and vulnerable and raw? And in that area, I don't feel that insecurity. But when I was in that room, I felt it, you know, and Is there ever, do you think that there can ever be a time where a person can feel completely comfortable in all situations about their vulnerabilities, about their mental health challenges? Like, do you think that'll ever actually come to be?
I think that goes back to what we were talking about before. Healing is work. All of this is a process. I guarantee if you went to 10 more of those, and each time you had different conversations, your comfort would build. Yeah. And I think that's all about going through the middle of the storm rather than around. I have been doing the professional speaking now for, I don't know, over a decade. And I can honestly say that I feel like I have arrived. That's a weird word, but I'm saying like I have actually embraced everything. I'm done with the overwhelming shame. I'm very comfortable in my message and who I am. Put me in any room, I'm okay. That only happened this last fall. So that's some context of, and I'm not saying I arrived. I don't know that we ever arrive.
Yeah.
But
I kind of hope we don't.
Yeah, right? Because we're always growing. But for me, that was the first time where it's like everything came together and I started to believe in myself, the inside work, not complete, but I would say comfortable.
Well, I think we've covered some good ground today. I think maybe we should cap it off. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with before we put a lid on it?
I go back to where I was, and I think that even for anyone listening, you know, it's unbelievable when we look at where we were, and then if you think about where you are, and ultimately where you want to go. Because we are in charge of our own life. Like, we have to take that ownership. And for me, I know that was a big thing. I was the victim. Woe is me. I pointed my finger at everyone else. And as soon as I understood that I was the one who's in a position of power to do something about it, that's when change really happened. And understanding that I wasn't alone, and understanding the value of finding my voice and putting a voice to my pain and finding those support groups. That's been everything.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Allan. It was a pleasure having you. The very first in-person, in-studio interview on the Hard Knox Talks platform. Mr. Allan Kehler.
Daniel, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.
All right. Take care, everyone. We are out. See you next time.
Say, this is Hard Knox Talks.